The France national team has some of the most talented crop of players on the planet. In fact, there aren't many top clubs who have the squad depth that Didier Deschamps has at his disposal. No wonder they're World Cup defending champions and still favorites to go on and retain the title later on in the year. But it has not always been like that for the French. The France national team has existed since 1904 and featured in the first ever FIFA World Cup tournament, which was held in Uruguay in 1930. It was one of theirs, Lucien Laurent, who even scored the first goal in World Cup history in their opening game against Mexico in 1930. But all around, the team was far from impressive in that tournament. They lost their following games to Argentina and Chile, and therefore did not make it out of the group stage. France can be considered a late bloomer in the World Cup scene. If you counted World Cup history starting from 1998, they would in fact rank first in the world, having one more title to their name than Brazil, Italy, Germany, and Spain, all other winners since. But World Cup history begins in 1930, and this is why France, historically, is still not in the top 4 of the world. They are, however, a very significant country for international football history, and here's why. Their record at the World Cup improved as the years went by, with France reaching the round of 16 and quarterfinals in 1934 and 1938 respectively, before the standard dropped again. They failed to qualify in 1950 and then failed to make it out of the group stage in 1954. But then, before we move any further, let's take you back to 1931, when something really significant happened in the French team. That year was the first time ever a black player was selected to join the French national squad. Raoul Diagne, who was of Senegalese descent, was a pioneer in many ways. He became both the first black player and the first player of African descent to play a match for the French national team. By the 1938 World Cup, France had 2 players of African descent in their team, Raoul Diagne and Larbi Ben Bark. Now, considering Diagne was born in France to Senegalese parents, the latter was referred to as the first actual African player to play for the France senior team. Ben Bark, who played as an attacking midfielder, was regarded as the man who paved the way for African footballers to thrive in Europe, having played for Marseille and Atletico Madrid himself. Anyway, although the 1950s did not start exactly great for the French, they were beginning to build a really formidable team, and by the end of the decade, they were a force to be reckoned with. Having been knocked out in the group stage in Switzerland in 1954, they went into the World Cup in 1958 as underdogs, but they made it all the way to the semifinals for the first time, where they lost to eventual champions, Brazil. But as far as Sweden 58 is concerned, there is one name you always have to remember, and that is Just Fontaine. Also born in Morocco, Fontaine was France's most outstanding player in the 50s, and his goals were very important in helping France secure their first ever World Cup bronze medal. He scored 4 goals in the third place playoff against West Germany, which took his tally to 13 in that tournament alone. Till today, that remains the record number of goals scored by a player in a single World Cup tournament. To help you understand how impressive that record is, listen to this. The record for the most goals scored by a single player in a World Cup history is 16, and it took Miroslav Klose 4 tournaments to reach that number. But Fontaine scored 13 in just 1 tournament. Crazy, isn't it? Anyway, he shockingly did not make it into the World Cup All-Star team that year, even though he alone had scored 13 goals, while all the 5 attacking players selected, including Pelé and Garrincha, scored a combined total of 12 goals. But following such an incredible high at the 1958 World Cup, France sunk to the lowest of lows in the following years. They failed to qualify for the 1962 edition, and although they qualified for England 66, they did not get past the group stage. At this point, France started looking for a lasting solution to their problems, and that led them to hire the World Cup legend, Just Fontaine, to manage the first team in 1967. French fans all around the world believe in Fontaine and hope he would restore the team back to the glory they enjoyed back when he was a player. But Fontaine lasted just 2 games. The record holder was fired and replaced with Louis de Gauques, but that did not solve France's problems at all. As a matter of fact, during that period was when France tasted their worst World Cup run. For the first time ever, the France national team was absent from back-to-back World Cup tournaments after failing to qualify for Mexico 70 and West Germany 74. But something really significant happened for the French in 1976. A certain super talented 20-year-old midfielder made his debut for the France senior team after completing his military service. His name, Michel Platini. He made his debut in front of the home fans in a friendly against Czechoslovakia in March of 1976, scored a brilliant free kick to mark a new dawn for Les Bleus. The following year, he scored a more beautiful and more important goal, a strike from 30 yards out against Bulgaria, which sent France to their first World Cup since 1966. It was not happily ever after from there. Even with Platini, France could not make it out of the group stage after losing to Italy and hosts Argentina. But there were positives. Things had started looking up. Before the 1982 World Cup, Platini had been made captain and handed the number 10 jersey. The entire country was looking up to their new star, and he did not let them down. He scored one of his trademark free kicks against Netherlands to help France qualify for the 1982 tournament in Spain. In that tournament, he led France to their second ever FIFA World Cup semi-final appearance, where they faced West Germany. Platini scored the opening goal of the game, which ended in a 3-3 draw after extra time, a match which, till date, is regarded as one of the greatest matches in World Cup history. But the game, being level after extra time, went into penalties, which the French lost 5-4. They also lost their third-place playoff game against Poland to finish fourth in that tournament. But the Platini chapter was not over. He was still captain and was determined to lead his team to World Cup glory. 1986 was going to be his last chance, but he was determined to bring honor to his nation. However, the legendary playmaker was past his prime at this time, so it was not going to be easy. He was 31 and struggling with growing problems, but he insisted on playing under injection. He ended up being integral to France's third-place World Cup semi-final appearance. He scored the opening goal against Italy in the round of 16, which helped knock out defending champions. Then, he scored the equalizer against powerhouse Brazil to send the game into extra time and then into penalties. Although Platini failed to convert his spot kick, his goal in regular time, which made him France's all-time top scorer at the time, proved sufficient as France went on to knock out Brazil on penalties. They faced West Germany again in the semis, and just like in the previous edition, they lost. But they went on to beat Belgium in the third-place playoff to match their then biggest World Cup achievement, bronze. And that marked the end of an era in French football. Platini retired the following year, and following his exit, the French experienced another extended period of really low lows. Like they had done before, France called on their football legends to help return the team back to glory. They hired Michel Platini to coach the first team in 1988, but he was unable to do for them as a coach what he did as a player. Therefore, after failing to qualify for the 1990 World Cup and crashing out in the group stage of the 1992 Euros, Michel Platini stepped down as a coach of France. His assistant, Gérard Houllier, took over from him and sunk Les Bleus to perhaps the lowest it has ever been. The French already had one leg in the 1994 World Cup, with 2 games to go against Bulgaria and Israel. Games France were expected to win. Israel, who were at the bottom of the qualification group, pulled a shocker and defeated France 3-2. Then, Bulgaria put the final nail in France's coffin by beating them 2-1. That meant that, for the second time in their history, France failed to qualify for back-to-back World Cup tournaments. The fans were devastated, and a change was demanded. That led the French Football Federation to sack Houllier and force out several players. The new-looking squad first showed signs of a new dawn in 1996 when they went all the way to semis in the Euros that year. Then, the year 1998 came around. They were hosting the World Cup again, 60 years after they first did it in 1938. They were determined to give their home fans a real show, and they knew they had the players to do that. But of course, all eyes were on one man, Zinedine Zidane. The super talented playmaker went on to give a very paradoxical performance in that tournament. After brilliant games in the opening 2 games of the group, Zidane then became the first ever French player to be shown a red card at a World Cup game after his foul on Fahd Anwar in their final group game against Saudi Arabia. Without him, France managed to beat Paraguay 1-0 in the round of 16. Zidane returned in time to help Les Bleus knock out Italy and Croatia in the quarterfinal and semifinal respectively. Now, although the French midfielder had been outstanding the entire tournament, he had not yet recorded a goal. It would appear that he was indeed saving the best for last. In the final, against defending champions Brazil, Zidane put up one of the best solo performances ever seen in a World Cup match, completely mesmerizing the Brazilians and then scoring France's first 2 goals to secure their first ever World Cup. That was France's first golden generation. The second would come exactly 20 years later, in what appeared to concretize the concept of the World Cup winner's curse. France did not make it out of the group in 2002. They finished bottom of their table after a shocking defeat to first-timers Senegal, a loss against Denmark, and a goalless draw against Uruguay. 2006 was much better though. Zidane was called out of retirement for one last dance, and it seemed like it was going to be the perfect story. Zizou winning the World Cup on his first and last attempt. But as you probably already know, it was not meant to be. In extra time, Zidane buried his head into Materazzi's chest and was immediately sent off, putting a little stain at the very end of a rather immaculate career. France went on to lose to Italy on penalties, but Zidane still won the Golden Ball, despite his indiscipline in the final. Zidane's retirement marked the end of another era, and as it seems to always be for Les Bleus, after an era ends, they experience a really low low. And this time, that came in 2010. The 2010 World Cup was not just bad for France, it was chaotic, dramatic, and utterly embarrassing for the former World Cup champions. France went to South Africa with some of the biggest names on the globe, including Henry, Anelka, Evra, Lloris, Abidal, and Ribéry, to name a few. However, there were too many problems in the dressing room that caused the team to self-destruct. They ended up crashing out with just 1 point and 1 goal scored, losing to Mexico and South Africa and securing their only point in a goalless draw against Uruguay. That disgraceful outing had massive consequences. The president of the FFF resigned, the captain, Thierry Henry, retired from international football, the coach, Raymond Dominic, left and was replaced by Laurent Blanc, who then influenced the FFF to suspend every member of the 2010 World Cup squad. Blanc took France to the 2012 Euros, but never got the opportunity to lead them to any World Cup tournament, as he resigned shortly after losing to Spain in the quarterfinal of the Euro 2012. He was immediately succeeded by the only man to have captained France to World Cup success at the time, Didier Deschamps. He led the new team project to the quarterfinal of the 2014 World Cup, where they were knocked out by eventual winners, Germany. Things were looking positive though. You could tell already that Didier Deschamps was assembling a formidable team, and the influence of players from African descent really cannot be overlooked. The France national team, which as at '98 had just about 3 players of African descent in Zidane, Vieira, and Desailly, was now dominated by players of African descent in 2014. There were Mamadou Sakho and Bakary Sagna of Senegalese descent, Patrice Evra of Senegalese origin and Guinean and Cape Verdean descent, Moussa Sissoko of Malian descent, Blaise Matuidi of Angolan and Congolese descent, Karim Benzema, who would get suspended not long after the 2014 World Cup, of Virgilian descent, and Paul Pogba, who won the Best Young Player award at the 2014 tournament in Brazil, of Guinean descent. France had become a bastion for African immigrant talent that would only go on to become even more influential in the success of France in international football. They quickly started preparing for the next international tournament, which was the 2018 World Cup in Russia. They went on a pretty good run in the qualifiers, losing only one of their 10 qualifying matches and comfortably securing a spot in the tournament. France had arguably the best squad in Russia. It was often said that their second 11 could beat many of the teams at the World Cup, but in spite of all that incredible talent, they had a very slow start to the 2018 World Cup, drawing against Denmark and beating inferior Australia and Peru by just 1 goal margins. But they seemed to come to life in the round of 16 game against Lionel Messi's Argentina, beating them 4-3 in a World Cup thrill of a match. The quarterfinals saw them dispatch Suarez Uruguay 2-0, and a headed goal from Umtiti was enough for them to beat Hazard's Belgium in the semifinal. Therefore, after 12 years, they were back in the World Cup final. This time, they were to face Luka Modric's Croatia, and honestly, from the referee's first whistle to the final one, France looked in total control. They became World Cup champions for the second time after beating the Croatians 4-2 thanks to an own goal from Mandzukic, a penalty from Griezmann, and 2 beautiful goals from Pogba and their wonder kid, Kylian Mbappé, a man of Cameroonian, Nigerian, and Algerian descent. With that goal, Mbappé became only the second teenage to score in a World Cup final. The other? You guessed it right, Pelé. That World Cup success made Didier Deschamps only the third man to ever win the World Cup as both player and coach, but only second to do it as both captain and coach. Going into the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, you look at the options Deschamps has at his disposal and you see that he's even more spoiled for a choice that he was back in 2018. However, after a disappointing 2021 Euro and failing to qualify for the Final Four of the UEFA Nations League, the World Cup champions' curse seems to be looming over Les Bleus. But the big question is, would they be able to hold their nerves and go all the way like they did in the last edition, or will they fall to the World Cup winners' curse, just like they did in Korea-Japan 2002? What do you think?